Hi, Rupert. Good afternoon, good evening. So, how is it in Oxford today? Is it beautiful weather?
Well, unfortunately, or fortunately, I should say, it is very beautiful weather, and it's one of the nicest times of the year because it's spring all around here. So a lot of the gardens and the flowers are all coming out. It's really beautiful, but we're in lockdown, so we can't do anything. So we can just sort of stay at home and sort of admire what's going on television, pretty much. There's not really very much that we can do, and so most of my day is spent researching and writing, and then also trying to talk to people to find out what's going on in the rest of the world. And tell us what's and in the UK, obviously, we seem to be just about hitting the peak of the coronavirus. So it looks like the cases are sort of still high, but possibly we might just be over the edge. It's no longer increasing at the same rate. It's sort of slowed down in terms of increasing. But the big question everybody here has got is what's going to happen to the economy? How are we going to open up the economy again? That's the big challenge that everybody's sort of questioning the government about. And do we have enough testing kits? Can we get our how do we open up the economy again? How do we get people back to work? Because I think people like myself, and I'm sure many other people, they like this opportunity of being with the family, but it's still a bit of a headache because most people actually quite enjoy their work, and they want to get out to work, and they're professionals and they're pretty good at what they're doing. So a lot of that's the sort of the big headache here at the moment in the UK. How about you? What's Mumbai like?
I think the problem that we're facing in Mumbai is the cases got up this time. I think yesterday we had around 500 new cases.
Just
So
in Mumbai alone?
this Maharashtra, the state where
Yes.
Mumbai is. So I think it's a pretty tricky period in Maharashtra as well, and we kind of estimate the lockdown might even get extended beyond the current target of 3rd of May. So we don't know what is peak or whether we are on the flattening curve or going up or going down and so on. So that's where Mumbai is.
Well, one thing's for certain is whoever comes up with if whoever comes up with the vaccine will be certainly a candidate for some sort of Nobel Prize or some very big global prize. So not just for their own personal benefit, but also for the credibility of the country. So there's now a bit of a race going on. It's a bit like the space program. Which country was it, Russia or America, that could get the first man onto the moon? And so Russia managed to get the first man into space. America got their first person on the moon. And now there's much of a similar sort of competition, if you like, between all the big countries, as to who can come up with a vaccine that can then be properly, sort of accredited around the world. So that's something that we're going to be watching very much. But that's, yeah. I'm sure India should have a good chance.
Yeah.
There's a lot of very big pharma and some very clever researchers, and so I'm sure that India must be pretty close to or as advanced as anybody else. But I know that China, it's become a bit of a national thing. Like if we lose this race, it's going to look bad. America has got the same. If we don't get the vaccine first, an accredited vaccine is going to make us look mad. And ditto, a lot of the universities I've been hearing in England and reading articles here about how a lot of the universities here are sort of talking about, sort of what, about the part that they want to play in getting a vaccine out. So, and then of course, and today's topic is you get the likes of the Bill Gates Foundation and everybody else who's sort of making donations to try and sort of help push people in the direction of a vaccine. Not necessarily just for the invention of the vaccine, but actually then the manufacturing and distribution of the vaccine. So, yeah.
Yeah, I think this week, last couple of weeks, we've been speaking about the impact of the economy as a whole, and we spoke about interesting. We touched upon real estate sector, and in fact, we did speak about the overall reality in our last conversation. and since the time we spoke, and now the share price has gone up by almost 30%. Our expertise in looking at the stories of modern businesses through the eyes of entrepreneurs, I think it has a lot of intuition behind it. So last few weeks have been mainly about wealth creation, and this week we plan to focus on philanthropy, starting with our little conversation here. And over the next week, we intend to speak to the CSR heads, the philanthropists, and the whole ecosystem and try to get their views there. Coming to global philanthropy, in India, it's been a quite a tectonic shift in terms of how the philanthropy in India is evolving since COVID-19. Uh, we know for a fact that uh, uh, most of the companies are allocated their CSR funds towards COVID-19. A lot more new donations have come up, and this year, the Hurun India philanthropy list, the way it would look this year, would be very different from how it looked last year. A lot of new donors come into picture, and donating huge amounts of money. Everybody's coming out, even wealth management firms. Everybody's coming up in terms of donation. Even the finance minister has said that any donation towards the prime minister's COVID fund, which will be considered as a CSR spend. So that's going to be interesting as well. So a lot more push towards philanthropy focused on COVID-19 is evolving in India. Uh, what do you see in the rest of the world, and what do you see in the UK? What's happening on that side?
Well, I mean, there's been a big story in the UK of a 99-year-old man who said that he wanted to raise money for the British healthcare system, which is called the NHS. And he said, age 99, he was going to walk 100 laps of his garden. And so this is like a story which I probably heard about 10 days ago, 2 weeks ago, and I didn't really think anything of it. I was like, wow, great, some really old guys, for walking 100 laps. He's now raised something like 25 million pounds. And he's completely caught the zeitgeist, the imagination of so many people, because there he is doing his little tiny bit, walking up and down his garden, walking around, and he's now raised for the NHS, the healthcare ministry, if you like, in the UK. He's raised 25 million pounds for that. So people are wanting to find an outlet here in the UK to make donations. If you look at the volunteers. And about 3 weeks to 4 weeks ago, the British government asked for volunteers to come forward to help in various formats. They didn't specify exactly what. And I think within 2 weeks, they had something like 750,000 signed up volunteers. And to date, only 25,000 of those volunteers have actually been called up. The other 725,000 are just sort of on standby, ready to and waiting for something to do. So that's just sort of two anecdotes, if you like, from the UK side. And so we've seen this great surge of people wanting to do things. It's this 99-year-old man. He seems to be a catalyst for so many, sort of for helping people do something. And various friends and family. I was talking to people, and they said, "Oh yes, I donated £50 or £20 or even £100." To that man, because his is the best idea that we've heard so far. Because you don't really know what else and where else you should be donating to. But clearly, if you look at big philanthropy, Europeans are a bit strange because I think the money often is quite old, and so and there's seems to be, relatively speaking, quite high taxes. So if you look at Northern Europe, the tax system plus the inheritance tax is really quite high. And so we've never actually, when we did a sort of a global philanthropy list, I was always shocked at how few Europeans made our global philanthropy list and how it was dominated totally by Americans, Chinese, and Indians and others as well. But that the Europeans as a whole, they control so much of the world's GDP and so much of the world's wealth, and were sort of generally speaking felt that the responsibility of the state was to step up, and that individuals sort of pay big taxes to the state, and then the state sort of gets on with it. And I believe this is evolving, but it's not as fast as I expected. And if you look at America, for example, in America you've got death duties, and one of the ways of getting around, if that's the right expression, around death duties, is you can make it all a donation to charity. So then you don't have to. Then your descendants, they don't have to pay death duties. So there's a huge material incentive to come up with your favorite fund, your foundation theme, and to make a big donation under US philanthropy law, charity law. In China, for example, I've been tracking the China top philanthropists for about 17 years this year. And we don't have inheritance tax. So if you're a big entrepreneur and you die, your descendants, your children, they don't pay a penny, nothing. And so, in that sense, and yet there is still quite a lot of philanthropy going on. I think it's mainly, so that's just a theme that I'm sort of picking up on. So the Europeans, a lot of money, but I think they do it they sort of do it very close to government, or they think that the government ought to be doing it. And in America, you've got death duties, but that's driven a lot of people to do big philanthropy, and the likes of Warren Buffett, Bill Gates, and they've been consistently year in year out making big donations, even though their wealth still continues to grow so much, because they grow faster than they can give it away, which is a problem that perhaps we can talk about. And then you got the likes of China, where you've got no inheritance tax, but there is sort of quite an interesting concept of what's going on with philanthropy. And just to summarize sort of my opening, if you like, is I think the big challenge is to draw the line between where is the responsibility of the private sector and where is the responsibility of the government. And that line, naturally, I would say, as governments, it becomes sort of that the governments are sort of pulling back more and more, letting the private sector take over. But quite whose responsibility is it to combat COVID-19? Is that the government's responsibility, or is that the private individual's responsibility? And you would have thought in these sort of national things, well, that's probably the government's responsibility. But whose responsibility is it to feed the people in your village? Well, you might say that's the government's, but actually, if I came in and stepped in, I could make a small difference to 20 people or 50 people or 100 people. I could possibly step in here because the government's out of resources. So I think those are sort of some of the thoughts that came about. When you compare India philanthropy list with our China philanthropy list, also quite interesting. We found that if you look at people who've donated more than so $3 million US, which is what, 20 crore. And if you in China last year, which is sort of, and it's the last year's data, it's our most recent data. I was just looking through yesterday. We had 120 individuals who's donated more than 20 crore. In India, at that same 20 crore level, you're looking at about 40 individuals. That we know of, because there's clearly a lot of people out there who, for various reasons, just being very discreet or religious reasons or other reasons, they choose not to let anybody know about it. But that we can find in the market and stand up and be counted. It's 120 people in China, and 20 odd people and 42 people in India. Anyway, so I just think, what do you see the trends in this time with India?
I think one of the most quite heartening trend from our researchers' perspective, we researchers are very much hungry for data. What we see is these donations public.
Sorry, my computer is running out of thing. Sorry. Yes, sorry.
In India, what we see is some of the donations have been made public, in the sense that individuals who have donated are coming out on the social media and are speaking about the donations. Quite often it is not the case in India, because India is a country which follows the principle of Gupta Dan, which means that whatever money you donate is kept in the secret. That's essence of it. I'm not a big Hindi speaker, but that's what it means essentially. But what we now really see is most of the people are coming forward, donating huge donations, and they're coming out in the public and saying, "Look, we've donated this much amount of money," or even if they don't say the amount, they possibly even say that no, we've donated X amount of money, we're sponsoring X amount of kids and so on. What that does to the philanthropy in general is it kind of nudges or motivates other individuals to come forward and make donations. So that is definitely I would say, some kind of philanthropic revolutionist sort of things happening in India, wherein a lot of people are coming forward, donating money. Donating money is only one thing, but also speaking about the donations, that's another thing. So I would definitely say that the number 40 you mentioned about for the philanthropist, it would definitely hit 100 for this year with anybody who's donating more than 20 crores. So even also donated 25 crores and above, So that's the kind of massive shift that we see. And the year has just begun. So we've got the full year, the rest of the year from a philanthropy perspective. So it's going to be a watershed moment from the Indian philanthropy perspective, definitely. And it's absolutely needed for a country like India. We are not as rich as possibly the US or the China. There's a huge gap in the government spending, and that gap can be filled only by private donation. And this year is possibly going to be that year where private donations are going to take a very active role in terms of even recovering the economy post-COVID, and that's what we see in India. So we'll expect a lot of government regulations, government policies, a lot more private donations, a lot more government companies who are giving a lot of CSR donations. So a whole bunch of things you'll see over the next few months. So that's a definitive change. Do you think you would witness a similar change in the UK or China or the US, or is it going to continue like the way it was the last year?
Well, I mean, if you look, I mean, again, just drawing on the research that we've done into China, and just the comparable large country to India in that sense, over the course of the last 16 years, the number one destination for these big philanthropy, if you like, has been education. So originally, before I did this, I thought it might be medical or healthcare. But in fact, it's absolutely overwhelmingly education is number one. And there's only been two other instances in China where education has been overtaken. Once was during the 2008 earthquake that happened in China, when hundreds of thousands of people were killed. And that stimulated an extraordinary outburst of patriotism. And sort of pretty much everybody on the rich list, for the first time ever, stood up, and basically said they wanted to make a big donation. So that was when disaster relief sort of took over once. I haven't seen the same trigger this time with COVID-19, possibly because it's, again, the fine line of where does the government's responsibility end and the individual's responsibilities, where can they actually make a difference? And, does the government need the money as such? So that was one. And then the second one is that there's been this big push in China over the last 5 years, I should say, to alleviate poverty, to take people out of the poverty, which is defined as, I think, $1 of income per day. And so there's been a huge amount of poverty alleviation and poverty relief been going on, which is big entrepreneurs have woken up to the fact that this is where the political wind is blowing, and have sort of been very active in making donations in this field, perhaps to their hometown. They've been building businesses, that wouldn't necessarily make sense to build a business there, but they put a factory in their hometown, and that gives 10,000 jobs to people locally, and helps take people out of poverty. So there's been that's sort of been sort of the big trend as far as I can see. Yeah. So again, when we were looking at the India thing, we found also interestingly that most people feel that education was the thing that they could, the cause that they could donate to, that they can feel they can really make a difference. But in India, number 2 was healthcare. And so that was, healthcare came like number 4 or something in China. And, and again, that was something that people donate to, that they could feel that they can make a difference. And possibly also because you've got a lot of very, very good pharmaceutical companies in India. And so that's sort of my comment as to sort of the causes that people are donating to.
So education is definitely a very important factor, and I always would support the notion that education very much has to be supported in India. Because I come from the state of Kerala. Possibly the way Kerala has managed uh, the pandemic, it's been fantastic. Literally, it's been talked about by the world media, and partly it's mainly because of the overall demographic, which is very highly educated. So education being the number one cause is always will always stay relevant from an Indian philanthropy perspective over the next, at least the next foreseeable future. Some of the important developments that have come is, there are quite a few organizations who have started a philanthropy movement in India. For example, we partnered with this amazing foundation called the Edelweiss Foundation for the philanthropist, and we've been talking about the philanthropic story since last year. So they have started in association with Rishit Premji, who's the son of Azim Premji, and Oxfam, and they've coming up with a charter of philanthropy, and they are popularizing the whole thing, and possibly even make it like a giving pledge equivalent from an Indian perspective. A very highly respectable platform. So we see such philanthropy focused movements happening in India, which is very encouraging, from our perspective. This could eventually lead in a lot of, good philanthropy in the years to come. Yeah, go ahead, please.
Then I was going to say, just following on from the idea of sustainable donations in education. So one of the big trends that I've spotted is the global entrepreneurs are now donating to their universities. And so we've seen the likes of Steve Schwartzman, who made a very big donation to Oxford University last year. And it was 100 and something million US. He's previously he made a donation to a Chinese university, Tsinghua University, of 100 million US. And I think he's done quite a lot in America. And amongst the Chinese, they're donating back to their alma mater is incredibly, popular at the moment. It's almost like a trophy, if that's the wrong expression, and it probably sounds bad, but it is the sense that, if I donate back to my university and I'm able to give, $5 million, $10 million, and have a building or a chair or whatever it is named after me, that's a real sense of achievement. I was a student, I had nothing when I was there, and here I am today, and I'm able to donate to a department or whatever it is at the university. That's something that I see is very popular at the moment. And going to the Chinese, there's been massive donations. Peking University last year in our list, we identified just from the top 100 total donations amounting to 140 million US dollars. Tsinghua University, just from our list, received total donations of 70 million US dollars. These are massive numbers. Now they have two impacts. The first impact, of course, is, it allows the entrepreneurs, are just saying, to have that feel-good factor, being able to donate back to their university. But if you're a famous university, you're then going to get better research, and your rankings in the world universities is going to go up. So if you're able to receive, I'm sure if IIT is getting the alumni to donate a lot of money, or some of the other universities, that's going to have one clear impact. It's going to raise the status of that university in the world of its peers. And that will be good, not just for that university, but for India as a whole, or in this case, China as a whole. So, making a big donation to a university in a field of your choice and will drive better research, but you keep it in the country. For example, this entrepreneur in China has just made, earlier this month, or 2 weeks ago, 750 million one-off cash donation to Tsinghua University for public health. So he's going to set up 750 million. He claims it's probably the largest single donation to education in China, or one of the largest. Let's say top three. I don't know. I haven't researched it exactly. And then he gave it during the height of COVID-19. And the idea behind it is clearly a lot more research needs to be done in public health. This is he originally thought that America and a lot of European countries had it very well under control, but they realized since the outbreak that was not the case. And then he said also, and I was quite interested, and he said to me, "Oh, and another reason I'm doing it is because my donation will help Tsinghua University, which is based in Beijing, in the capital of China, will help Tsinghua University become a world leader in this particular field of public health. Because if you're able to spend that sort of money, you can bring in the world's very top names and brains and professors to all come and teach on that course." And I'm sure that's something that he's going to be planning to do. So this sort of making a donation to your university, I think it does have tremendous benefits on yourself, for your personal legacy, if that's the right expression, for driving the next generation, of course. If you're going to, driving the next generation. And then the third is not just that, but for your country, because your donation will probably help that university go up in its rankings compared to the rest of the world. And it's really important. These rankings are important, to attract top students going forward and top professors.
And have you seen any instances of your local entrepreneurs donating internationally across the borders? Have you seen any instances?
Yeah, this is a topic that is very, very interesting to me, and I've been trying to get more data on this. So a lot of the donations, let's say in China specific, are all pretty much to China related projects. And in fact, there's been, I'd say there's an active, the government is actively trying to promote domestic projects over and above international projects, because they're saying that China's got so many problems. Let's sort out our own problems first before we go out and try and solve the world's problems. It's not to say that the world's problems are less important. It's just that we've got so much that needs to be done here in China. Let's sort it out first. And so there is a sense of, discouraging entrepreneurs. So quite a famous entrepreneur in China, who's a bit of a showman, I have to say. He went to New York to make a big donation to, not a big donation, he donated quite a lot of cash. Literally, he handed out to beggars on the streets in New York and took lots of photographs. And that got a lot of negative publicity. It got a lot of negative publicity in China because he was seen to be showing off. It got a lot of negative publicity in America about, what's this Chinese guy going to America, which we didn't, and giving money to our homeless. And he's donating like $100, $200 to all the homeless he could meet in Central Park. And then so that sort of stuff creates a lot of sort of negative sort of sentiment about it. But I think as a whole, philanthropy is critical to build the image of the world's entrepreneurs, because if you're not seen to be donating, then what is all this money for? Before Bill Gates started becoming such a big philanthropist, he was criticized a lot in the media. It's difficult to remember this now, but it's 20 years ago. He barely made a donation. And he was given a lot of criticism. You've got more money than many a country. And of the 200 countries in the world, that his wealth probably is more than the GDP of many of the countries. What's he going to do with it? Now people get an idea. Okay, you set up a foundation, it's doing a good job, and so on and so forth. And I think Jeff Bezos recently has been getting a lot of flack as well. What is it? Why do you need 130 billion US dollars? And he's barely made any donations. He's made a very small donation by his percentage of wealth standards. But he's probably adding 10% of his wealth every year, or if not faster. And he's grown his wealth faster than anybody else in the last, say, 5 years. And yet his philanthropy has just got nowhere, is nowhere to be seen, basically. I know that he made a donation here, I think, of $100 million. It's a lot of money, but by his standards, it's like nothing. And he'll probably make $100 million in a week in terms of value, from, in a good year. So this is something that I think really needs to be thought about. And going finally just on the subject of big philanthropy and the image is, for example, in India, the Tata family. Now, I think it's a little known fact that the Tata family is probably the single largest philanthropist in the world. Certainly at its time it was, because we understand that 2/3 of the Tata Group is actually held by not-for-profit foundations.
Yeah.
And these foundations were created and set up by Mr. Ratan Tata's, was it his grandfather or his father?
Father, grandfather, across.
And then so in that case, that makes that, and that valuation of Tata Group is probably best part of 100 billion. I know it was about 100 billion last year. So that's 60-70% was best part of 60 billion. That would make him, or the grandfather or the father at the time, the largest individual philanthropist in the history, well, not in the history of the world, but in the world at the time. And I don't think a lot of people realize this. I think people sort of think, oh, well, Indian philanthropy, people have a strong culture of helping their neighbors and so on. But are people in India aware that the world's #1 philanthropist was Ratan Tata's, forebear, his father or his grandfather who set up the foundation? And if you look at $60 billion and you put that into the context of Bill Gates, I don't think Bill Gates has donated 60 billion by today. I don't think Warren Buffett has donated 60 billion as of today. It's a massive thing. And it's equivalent today of Jeff Bezos taking his shares and saying, you know what, I'm putting half into a foundation. That's the sort of number that Mr. Tata did at the time.
Yeah, so that's a very fair point. But then another perspective of the whole thing is, from our philanthropy-less perspective, we look at the actual donations. So if the shares were in the charitable trust for when the Tata Group's valuation was 10 billion, and now it has become 130 billion. So the valuation growth has happened when the shares was in the trust. So that will never feature in our philanthropy. That's as a side topic. Yeah, so that, but the more important, the 2 points that I want to discuss. You mentioned an interesting point about percentage of wealth being donated. Well, that's a very important yardstick. And when we launched the Hurun, the philanthropy list, the Hurun philanthropy list last year, one of the feedback that we got was we should possibly have a separate column in a philanthropy list, which basically says, I've donated whatever billion, but that is, and also show something like it's just a percentage of my total wealth. So that's an interesting analysis, and I don't know how the entrepreneurs will take it, but I think we got a feedback to show that as well. That's number one. And the number two is, I think this year could be a very good, possibly a good year for a private philanthropy. But I really think that this year also could be a bad year from a corporate philanthropy perspective, a corporate CSR perspective, because we expect the economy as a whole would possibly even go to a deep recession, which would mean that the earnings would get affected, which will have a trickling effect towards this year's philanthropy and possibly some part of next year's philanthropy as well, or CSR as well. That's getting the trend rising. What are your thoughts? Maybe that could be a parting note and the future, the short term and the long term prospects of philanthropy, and then we could possibly end our discussion.
Yes. Just going on to the idea of personal versus corporate philanthropy, and I've found myself being drawn more and more to CSR and to sustainable philanthropy. So I've met many foundations or not-for-profits, and they've been looking to ingratiate themselves with one or two individuals, and it's been very much at the whim of the individual. But in fact, it's much more sustainable for the project, if you like, and who's receiving the funds, if they can not have one or two people donating $1 million each, but they could have like $1 million people donating $1 each. It's much, much more sustainable in that sense. And so I think for corporate philanthropy, if you can, and I did quite a lot of research in this in one stage, probably about 10, 15 years ago, I started looking into it, and I started doing, at the time it was the word CSR, corporate social responsibility was the big word. And I started sort of trying to measure a company's effectiveness of its CSR. And then I had a big headache because I suddenly realized that the single biggest CSR thing that a company does is its main product. So if you're a home builder, then it is the quality of the home that you're building. And is your home truly done with, does it have a very good energy efficiency? Is it done with a very low carbon footprint? Is it built with, and all these sort of questions, and picking up slightly on our topic from real estate last week. And that suddenly realized I had no ability to judge this. This is your largest thing. If you're a large home builder and all your homes you're building are great quality or really poor quality, or some are good and some are bad, how do you actually measure that? That is your single biggest contribution to society. It's not the fact that you donated, sort of $2 million to some favorite cause of the chairman, but if you're selling a few $billion a year's worth of real estate product, or sort of consumer goods or FMCG or whatever it is, then that fundamentally is the biggest sort of benefit that you can have to society. So that's just something. That's why I've sort of become much more interested in sustainable corporate, call it social responsibility. That's something that I've been trying to get my head around. And I did my CSR report for about 3 years on the road. Then I gave it up. And I gave it up because I couldn't objectively quantify the value of whether a home builder's homes were actually good quality, or whether sort of home electronics products company, whether his products were actually good or bad. So, or whether they were worth the money that they were saying. So I eventually gave that one up. It's just going on to your first point about the amount of percentage of wealth that you donate. I was talking to Steve Schwartzman, who's the founder of Blackstone, and is their hedge fund. And as I mentioned earlier on, that he's made quite a lot of donations recently. And he was saying one of the troubles that he's got is, and a lot of his friends have, is that they make money faster than they can give it away. So it might sound amazing that he's just given $150 million to Oxford University, but in fact, he's just made $7 billion in the last year, or $2 billion in the last year. 150 million is really not a big percentage of it. It's just annual increase. And yet, this is the single largest donation in the history of Oxford University, which is close to 1,000 years of history. So this is something, if you look at the percentage, I think it is quite a good one to look at. But I'm waiting to see what Jeff Bezos does. He's the world's number one. He's worth 130 billion. What about Bernard Arnault from LVMH Group? We've seen that LVMH Group makes a donation every now and again. It's said during COVID-19 it's going to help make masks and stuff like that. And I think that's very good. But he's worth, well, he was just before COVID-19, the outbreak, he was worth best part of 100 billion US dollars. We haven't seen any donations of that big size. Should he not be donating not 2 million or 10 million or even 100 million? Shouldn't he be thinking about donating, so 10 billion, 20 billion? And where can he donate it to? And what? I mean, that's a massive number. And I just finished on this story that Warren Buffett's son, Peter, and he came out on a tour once, and I was entertaining him for about 3-4 days. And he was telling me, and he was telling the audiences, in fact, that we had dinner with, about how his father had one day said, "Hey, Peter, where are you? Are you near a fax machine?" So Peter says, "Yes." So just go to the fax machine and see what I've sent. So, and Peter goes, "Well, what's this?" He says, "I've just transferred $1 billion US to your account. You've now got to spend it on charity." And Peter was telling the story, and saying, "Well, it's quite easy to spend, $1 million, 2 million, 10, 20 million, or those are the numbers. You can find worthwhile projects, but when you're getting to the big numbers, it says it's really, really difficult, because you might shift the whole way of thinking in the wrong direction. You've really got to, think about what the core of the core of the problem is, and there's, one more little story, but the story of, in order to address smoking in society, would you be better off by making a donation of $10 billion and building lung cancer hospitals, or hospitals against lung cancer? Or would you be better off to use your influence to try and persuade governments to change policy on allowing more people to smoke, or stopping young people from smoking, or trying to increase tax on smoking? If you can persuade the government policy to change, isn't that more effective? So again, this takes us to the core of what is the core of the problem. Is it the fact that there's not enough hospitals with that are helping individuals with lung cancer, or is it research into lung cancer, or is it that actually the core is to stop people in the first place? And these are obviously quite complex problems that people on the Hurun global rich list, or even the India list, or the China list, or whichever list it is, country list is, that they are facing individually.
Great. I think that pretty much sums up our discussion. Just a few minutes back, Infosys just released their annual return, and what I hear from the news is they didn't really beat the expectations. It fell short of expectations. So I think that's pretty much going to be the story of Indian corporates and possibly the global corporates over the next 6-7
Sorry,
months.
what did Infosys release?
The quarterly results.
Yes, and
I think it fell short of expectations.
I think, unfortunately, that's going to happen quite a lot over the next few years. And as this, especially for this quarter, it's going to be very, very tough.
Yeah.
It's going to be very, very tough.
And that will have an impact on philanthropy as well,
yes,
from a CSR perspective. So this year could be a watershed moment for private philanthropy. From a corporate CSR perspective, it could be a very muted year. And this silence might continue for the next 1 year at a bare minimum is what I expect. So yeah,
well, I would say that I've seen and heard a lot in the UK about how the coronavirus outbreak has had a massively detrimental impact on a lot of not-for-profit organizations, starting with schools, but also a lot of the garden centers, the tourist attractions that are actually not-for-profit. And because people haven't been able to go and support them, and they normally run on break even, and now suddenly they're looking at a massive loss, and they don't know how to, sort of get through this. So a lot of people. So I think it is an incredibly challenging time for a lot of these foundations and not-for-profits to try and generate income, because people's individual income is down, plus the fact that you're in lockdown, and a lot of these non-for-profits you would probably be spending money with, just as a natural way of your daily life. You might not even think particularly that is this restaurant or bar or whatever it is, or school or something, a not-for-profit. But if it is, and so it is a very, 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 it's going to be very, very tough, I think, unfortunately. So our job is to record what we see, help more people understand what is behind the thinking of some of the big philanthropy, and then hopefully, sort of by helping people understand, possibly trigger to an advancement of thought on this subject. And this is a big, big topic, and it goes really to the heart of what is the point of business. It goes to that part. What is the point of making money beyond what we call financial economic freedom? And perhaps we can talk about that next time. How much is enough? And but the real thing is that if you've made, let's assume that $10 million is enough, and if you've got 11, well, what are you going to do with that 1 million? What are you going to do? It's pointless. It's totally pointless. So you're going to have to start thinking about what to do with it. But that's possibly a topic for another time.
Anyway, consider the fact that most of the for-profit companies are going to be not-for-profit in the next few months. So it'll be a very
yes.
All right. Thank you, Rupert. Thank you, everyone. We'll see you next week, same time. Thanks.
Thank you very much, Anas, and thank you very much to all those who are watching, and I hope that we can inspire you and hopefully be inspired back in return from some of the comments and thoughts that you're writing to us. Thank you very much.
Cheers. Bye.
Cheers. Bye-bye.